Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. We are continuing with the video set series of the types of political systems by talking about what it looks like to have a country operated by small amounts of people and the issues with that. The political systems we will look at that go along with this concept are Warlordism, Theocracy, Aristocracy, and Oligarchy. Before we talk about what each of these political systems are, let's lay some foundation first about having a government run by small amounts of people. As we already know from the previous videos, having a government run by one person can be problematic, especially if there are little to no accountability measures to ensure the leader is looking out for their citizens. So, would it be better to have several more people be in charge of a country's government? The answer depends on the systems put in place to ensure the leaders are doing what they are supposed to be doing and looking out for their country's best interests. This standard applies to a single leader or group of leaders. Here are some questions we should think about when determining how much power someone should have. Who makes the decisions? Who controls where the money goes? Who determines right and wrong behavior? Who punishes people who violate the laws? How do the rulers come to power? How do they set government policies? How can regular people influence what the rulers do? These are important questions to ask because it is about balancing how much power the government and its citizens have. Now, when it comes to having a country being ruled with just a few people, humans have experimented with this in several ways. This type of government can be recognized by some common signs, such as a relatively small group of people holding virtually all the power. The members of that small group share key characteristics, and it is hard for other people to join the ruler's group, often because the members strictly control access to their group. When only a few people are in charge and there are no mechanisms for changing who they are, the government is like an exclusive club. The best way to keep the club exclusive is by setting a high bar for membership, depending on the political system accommodating this. Let's dive into them. For warlordism, it is similar to being a dictator, where warlords rule their territories through force and fear. But here's the difference. A dictator rules alone, while warlordism happens when the central government collapses or loses its authority. In the power vacuum left behind, individual strongmen seize control of whatever they can. Warlords are fundamentally self-interested in doing and getting things they want. They look out for their own needs first and will do anything to stay on top. They do this by starting with people who are already connected to them, and they keep their followers by mastering patronage politics. This means awarding government jobs, contracts, or other benefits to individuals in exchange for their political support or loyalty. All warlords need is a force strong enough to control economic leverage points such as transportation networks, extractive resource zones like mines and forests, farmland that can grow cash crops like opium, poppies, coffee, or cocoa, and revenue hubs like checkpoints and tax offices. Within their territories, warlords are the absolute masters. They make all decisions, control all the health systems, and rarely allow others to gain influence. Strength is what makes a warlord. They do whatever it takes to hold onto power. They do not care about the civilians because warlords want to make everything about themselves. This kind of government is causing more problems than it solves. Countries fragment under warlord governance. Even if the borders remain intact, everything inside them is broken. They do not even accept tourists. They either have followers or enemies. Essentially, this political system is like having multiple dictators rule over a country and always following their self-interests. Let's proceed to another political system, theocracy. This is where a religious hierarchy dictates how a government is organized and who can be a government official. Religious principles guide law and policy. For instance, your pastor can be your mayor, or the clergy tells the government what to do. Both kinds exist in the world today. The Pope runs a government and a church with some help. The laws are approved by the Pope's Holiness, naturally. These include the Pontifical Commission of the Vatican State, the President of the Pontifical Commission, and the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signature. The Vatican is small, and almost everyone who lives there is a member of the Catholic Church. But not all theocracies look like this. Sometimes lay officials run the day-to-day affairs of government, while certain religious authorities manage the big decisions behind the scenes. Think of it as like a play, where we see the actors, what they do, and how they interact. But most of what we experience depends on the work of people behind the scenes. The Ayatollahs and the Guardians Council choose which clerks can run for the Assembly of Experts, which pick an Ayatollah to be supreme leader for life, who appoints the Guardians Council, which decides who can run for public office and what laws can be passed. The president and parliament take care of the bureaucracy, and the council keeps the power where it belongs with the interpretation of God's law. The council makes decisions based on fundamental religious principles. People love the spectacle of elections, which is fine as long as the council controls who can run and what they do once they are in public office. If lay leaders do what the clergy wants, and the clergy's main job is making society conform to religious principles, then the faithful will have all their needs met by living in the virtuous Islamic society they create for them. But here is something to keep in mind. The holy books do not cover a lot of things modern people need, such as public transit, access to electricity, clean water, safe schools, etc. Suppose the clergy cannot agree on what religious principles to follow. There are a ton of churches, Catholic, Methodist, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and Baptist. They are all Christian, but they have different ideas about what that means. The council avoids that problem by not tolerating religious or political dissent and any disagreement at all. They believe a religious government unites people across languages and cultures and makes society stable. They point at the Vatican, which is still standing after almost 2 millennia. The council believes they can make people live the right way, and they know how God wants them to live. This is why they believe they should be in charge, despite them being human and making mistakes. The council answers to their God as their accountability measure, not through the citizens. However, the problem comes when negative situations happen in the Catholic Church. The church leaders could move their priests and anyone associated with them to new places as an attempt to cover it up. Again, they do not see themselves as answering to the citizens, but instead their God. So it is hard to get justice if all the religious officials are in for life and there are no outside institutions to force them to do the right thing. This is why the council does not let people start disagreeing with them, because they do not know where it will end. This sounds like theocracies are ultimately about serving the clergy and not prioritizing the viewpoints of the rest of the citizens. Let's look at another political system, aristocracy. This is a type of government where rulers are chosen based on bloodlines and kinship. Their authority comes from owning a lot of land, leading a clan or tribe, or being the keeper of an important ritual. They do not want to choose between progress and tradition, and successful governments find a way to honor both. In Ghana, their constitution recognizes the aristocracy as essential to having tradition shape what their people expect from their leaders. The leaders have lived there for almost 1,000 years. For example, part of the job as chief is to be a custodian of the land and the people. They must understand what both need to thrive, not just right now, but for the next generation and the one after that. The person sitting on the stool does not only manage the land and law. When people argue, that person uses their practices to resolve the disputes. People accept their justice because they understand where it comes from. This is true for each tribe. People trust the stool with all this power because they only choose from among the first families that call this place home. They also guide social and economic development by anticipating the future needs of their people. Each aristocracy distributes power in its way while keeping it all in the family. Now, keep in mind that aristocracy rests on some big assumptions. Let's go through those assumptions. Some people are just meant to rule because they have an innate grasp of the right way to live. This is all in the virtues. A true aristocrat has a certain magnitude of soul. Here is the problem with these assumptions. While rulers should be educated, public-spirited, and reasonable, a lot of people have these qualities anyway, no matter who their parents are, and they do not become leaders under this political system. The aristocrats believe that some people are just superior and believe other people do not know how to handle their wealth and power. They know it is not their fault, but it is because they were not born with it or raised with it. All in all, to gain power in an aristocracy, fate would have to be on your side by ensuring you are born in the right place, at the right time, and in the right family. Unfortunately, we cannot control who and how we are born, so it feels impossible to gain power in this political system, especially since the aristocrats already view people differently based on where they are born. Someone can seriously be a good person and want to enact positive change, but they would not be given a chance to do so if they were not born in the right family. Let's finish off with talking about another political system, oligarchy. This is a government system where power comes from wealth. In an aristocracy, wealth usually means how much land you own. In an oligarchy, it is about how much money you have. This political system has a relatively small group of extremely wealthy people control a disproportionate amount of political power. Sometimes they hold positions in government or work behind the scenes. Oligarchs use their control over the government to grow their wealth and to protect it from competitors and even the government itself. Remember, wealth does not just have to be about how much money you have. It also includes real estate, contracts, licenses for communication networks, or patents on life-saving drugs. Oligarchs use the government to control how they make future money. For all parts of the government that are not about making money and the stuff regular people rely on, the truth is that oligarchs rarely see the challenges regular people face. All the richest people live in gated communities and send their kids to private school. They belong to country clubs and yacht clubs no one else can afford. They never take public transportation. The richest people will never see regular people unless they are cleaning their houses or catering their parties. Oligarchs have an easier time getting the government's ear. For example, if they do not like people protesting over the highway and want it to be illegal to block roads like that, then they could call their representative and get a response from the representative quickly. However, it does not always work for the rest of us because there is a big difference between writing an email and having a representative in your living room. Oligarchs use their wealth and power to control the political agenda, which is a list of issues that leaders intend to address using the power of the government. Political agendas are based on what we need and what impacts our communities. Political parties adopt a political agenda they will work on together if elected. These include public safety, climate change, immigration, jobs, drug prices, privacy, and more. Oligarchs influence both agendas by controlling which issues receive attention through the media outlets and other information sources they own. They influence political party agendas by funding campaigns or threatening not to fund them. It is important to look at the history of this kind of political system rising up in society. Let's start at the Gilded Age, which was a time of immense change in America. This was the end of Reconstruction and the reimposition of white rule throughout the South. New people were arriving from around the world. There were fierce debates about whether the dollar should be backed by gold or silver. There were also smoke-filled back rooms, corruption, identity politics, and the rise of corporations. New technologies were emerging and people were starting to think, who's in charge around here? Us or some industrialists? The industrialists believed they invented modern America by laying tracks across the untamed wilderness and got treasure from the bowels of the earth. They raised vast shipping and manufacturing empires on the backs of immigrants and children trapped in sweatshops for 12 hours a day. They created light where there had been only darkness by killing the indigenous people and stealing their lands to drill for oil. They build the American economic juggernaut by running right over the working class world's dignity, safety, and basic human rights. Essentially, the oligarchs believe they made the country the way it was, so they should be in charge. The oligarchs of the Gilded Age thought certain qualities made them special, and they did have a lot of things in common, like being white, male, Protestant, born in upper middle class families, and well educated. They believed they were men of character, hardworking, and virtuous living, which are the things that made them rich and powerful. Until the end of the Civil War, most people worked for themselves or as part of a family business. But in the late 19th century, new technology made it possible to make more, make it faster, and ship it faster. Family businesses grew, bought up other family businesses, were bought up in turn, and the first big companies began to emerge. All of this was happening in a very unstable economy. The business owners needed a way to protect their profits from economic shocks, their workers, and their competitors. They did not turn to the government at first. They introduced people to the trusts. The bigger the companies got, the more influence each one had on how America functioned. No industry was as big and influential as the railroads. If you wanted to make it in America, you needed access to the railways. In theory, there were standard rates for hauling freight. The business owners wanted a discount on all Standard Oil shipments. In exchange, Standard Oil will only ship on their line since they refine almost 90% of the country's oil. It was a system that worked for everyone who was already making money, but not for anybody else. The railroads got guaranteed business. Their customers were not shopping around. Corporations have to keep their costs down and their competition from getting special rates too. Businesses got bigger and bigger. For the first time, single corporations were controlling most of what America consumed, and more people were working for these big companies. Workers noticed that every day there were longer hours, higher quotas, and crueler bosses. They did not feel like they had any control over their life anymore. Someone had to step in or they would be worked to death. They thought the government should step in, but the government had never been involved in regulating commercial activities, and the new industrialists were not interested in changing that. The industrialists believed the market had always been self-regulating and the government should not interfere with the natural law of business. If the markets are not doing what the government thinks they should do, then the industrialists believe the government was wrong. The industrialists also wanted to have some state legislatures off their backs too. People wanted the government to solve two big problems. The first the first problem was figuring out what to do about the railroads. The oligarchs used every lever they had to make sure they came out on top. The railroads made sure they had friends in government, either by paying to have them elected or by buying up the people who were already there. They put their people on the Supreme Court and state courts too. And of course, they had another powerful way to influence government officials. When a commission was finally established to regulate the railroads, the oligarchs undermined it. When the Interstate Commerce Act of 1887 was passed, it said the railroads had to change to reasonable rates. This meant the ICC could determine whether an established rate was reasonable, but it could not set the rate itself. So, people had to go to court every time they thought the rates were unfair, but rich people had the money and time for that. The directors of other big corporations supported the railroads all the way. The second problem was monopolies. The federal and state governments tried to regulate Standard Oil for decades. Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890 to break up monopolies such as Standard Oil and the railroad consortiums. The act prohibited every contract, combination, or conspiracy in restraint of trade, monopolization, attempted monopolization, or conspiracy of combination to monopolize. The oligarchs used their influence over Congress and the courts to derail enforcement of the new act. In the January 1895 Sugar Trust case, it ruled that this act does not apply to manufacturing, just commerce. They could produce 98% of the sugar in the country. In the February 1908 Danbury-Hadhurst case, it ruled that the act says labor unions can be an illegal conspiracy, which meant no more strikes or boycotts. The only people who got regulated were the workers, which is why they were so angry. Some agencies were created to better regulate corporate behavior, like the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Trade Commission, but better does not automatically mean something is fixed. We do not have oil monopolies anymore, but just a few corporations own all our internet and communication infrastructure. Just look at who sits on the FCC and the FTC, former corporate executives. Also, the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United that campaign contributions count as free speech. So wealthy businessmen still influence who gets elected. So when we let oligarchs have a lot of control and influence over how a country develops, they start to feel entitled that they should not only maintain that control, but act like they deserve that control. This is why we have to be careful about how much power we give to rich people and corporations to operate certain parts of society, so we do not give them the impression that they can only do things for themselves and are not accountable to the public. We cannot always continue to operate on the corporation's terms that go against society's best interests. Here are some takeaways. It does not look like having society controlled by a small set of individuals will be any better than a society controlled by one person, especially when there are no accountability measures for citizens to use. Warlordism rules through force, fear, and patronage politics that prioritizes personal gain, not public welfare. A theocracy has its religious leaders answer to their God rather than the public, which means they do not feel the need to listen to citizens' voices that question their authority. An aristocracy assumes certain families deserve to rule due to virtue and upbringing, which excludes every other capable person from gaining power and makes power inaccessible to most people if they are not born in the right family. An oligarchy concentrates power among the wealthy who use the government to protect and expand their wealth, which makes it difficult for anyone not wealthy to politically participate in society. In conclusion, the one thing we continue to see over and over again is that there is no guarantee in these political systems, one person rule or multiple people ruling, that rulers have to listen to their citizens' viewpoints or have to prioritize their needs. It is a choice that rulers can make on whether they want to make their leadership position about themselves or helping everyday people. Unfortunately, the incentives in these political systems are mainly geared for the rulers to benefit themselves. Even if a country as a whole does poorly when the rulers only act on their self-interest, it will not matter to the rulers because they care about becoming more personally powerful and rich. It will not matter to them that government structures have been devalued or dismantled. The economy is in worse shape or people distrust each other even more. As long as the rulers collected enough resources for themselves and for anyone associated with them, it will be a mission accomplished for them. We should not have to suffer as a society because a specific political system is not guaranteeing that the leader looks out for the people. We need a political system that has strong and sustainable accountability measures that citizens can use to make sure their leaders are not in public office for themselves, but for the people. Of course, we are still going to have good and bad leaders in our lives, but having those accountability measures in place will provide a tool for citizens to check their political leaders in following their country's best interests. Lastly, these political systems do not guarantee that citizens are allowed to freely choose their leaders and voice their opinions on who they believe are the best people to lead their communities. The leaders are either chosen on their own, born into it, buy their way into it, or forcing their way into it. None of which requires getting input from the citizens. To foster civic engagement, we cannot use these political systems. Instead, we need to use democracy as our political system to foster civic engagement. In the next video, we will talk about what democracy is and how it fosters people to be civically engaged. Until then, please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and turn on the post notifications so you will be notified when I post my next video. I appreciate your support. Remember, you are powerful, you are capable, and you are the changemaker our society needs. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you soon.